This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch for Wednesday, January 28th, with Reid Collins in Washington, Bob Cain and Marianne Loughlin in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. President Reagan had not given a public speech since before Christmas, but he traveled to Capitol Hill last night in hopes the sixth State of the Union address would get the administration back on track after the Iran-Contra affair. It was a moment of high drama for many as the president entered the House chamber to deliver what some considered his most crucial speech. We have two reports this morning from CNN's Pam Olson and from Frank Sesno.
It was the president's moment to show that after prostate surgery and nearly 3 months of the Iran arms affair, he is still in charge, energetic, eager to lead. There remains a reservoir of goodwill for the president. That much is obvious, but the Iran arms affair has hurt.
Although we made much progress, I have one major regret. I took a risk with regard to our action in Iran. It did not work, and for that I assume full responsibility.
Some had urged the president to apologize for selling arms to Iran. He did no such thing.
The goals were worthy. I do not believe it was wrong to try to establish contacts with a country of strategic importance or to try to save lives. And certainly it was not wrong to try to secure freedom for our citizens held in barbaric captivity.
Mr. Reagan didn't mention the diversion of funds to Nicaraguan Contras. Indeed, he said U.S. aid must continue.
I will fight any effort to shut off their lifeblood and consign them to death, defeat, or a life without freedom. There must be no Soviet beachhead in Central America.
Mr. Reagan presented a list of pending initiatives, among them catastrophic health insurance for the elderly, welfare reform. Both of those will be presented to Congress next month. Right-to-life legislation. It would deny federal funds to family planning clinics that make referrals for or perform abortions. A competitiveness package covering education, research and development, and trade.
We are always willing to be trade partners, but never trade patsies.
There was similarly tough language for Moscow. The president called for more responsible Soviet conduct around the world, and he said SDI will go forward. Mr. Reagan wanted his State of the Union message to refocus the national debate and reinvigorate his presidency. While he did lay out a broad legislative agenda, and while he did talk about Iran, little of what he said was new. Frank Sesno, CNN, the White House.
It was the president's blueprint for the year ahead. But first he had to address what has become the overwhelming issue of his presidency, the Iran arms deal.
I think the highlight was accepting again responsibility for the mistakes that were made in the so-called Iran arms scandal.
I think the president is back, and that was an eloquent defense of the recovery, the new beginning.
I get tired of the rhetoric sometimes. I think what we ought to do is realize the president tried. It was a covert action. If it had worked, everybody would be saying how wonderful it is. It didn't work. He assumes responsibility, said there were mistakes. Now let's go on from here, and let's quit kicking him in the knees, and let's get this thing going.
I completely disagree with that.
I know you disagree, but you've been doing this for a long time.
Everybody would cheer if it worked. It worked exactly what they intended to do.
No.
They were trading arms for hostages.
But in his official Democratic response, Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd said there were still too many unanswered questions.
The sale of arms to Iran in direct contradiction to our stated foreign policy raises real questions about trust.
Mr. Reagan was given high marks for style.
He was vintage Reagan in everything he said.
But Democrats declared he lacked substance.
I felt the president totally avoided or gave short shrift to some very high problems and some very great needs in our society.
Some of it clearly rang pretty hollow. When he talks about education, and then 2 weeks ago submitted a budget with a $5.7 billion cut in education.
But now comes the hard part. President Reagan must try for the first time to convince the Democratic-controlled House and Senate to pass his programs, and Democratic leaders are working equally hard to pass their own. Pam Olson, CNN, Capitol Hill.
Later this hour on Day Watch, a roundtable discussion with Carl Leubsdorf of the Dallas Morning News, Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and Dick Williams of the Atlanta Journal to get their reactions to the President's State of the Union address. The nearly 200 rebel soldiers holed up in a TV station outside Manila face an ultimatum this morning: surrender or be flushed out by government troops. Colonel Oscar Canlas is the leader of the mutinous troops, and he tells reporters that his soldiers are preparing to obey the orders, but he's asking for a little more time. The mutineers are the remnants of a coup attempt that failed yesterday, an event seen as the greatest challenge yet to the government of Aquino. Rebels say they oppose Mrs. Aquino's efforts to negotiate with the communists and the new proposed constitution. The Philippine government says they are pro-Marcos sympathizers. Well, in Honolulu, the ousted Philippine President Marcos called those mutinous troops heroes, but he denied having anything to do with their uprising.
The only thing that I can say right now is I hope this very dangerous situation does not escalate. That will be my hope, to be able to help bring it down.
Despite denials, the Aquino government placed the international airport in Cebu City, 360 miles southeast of Manila, on red alert, due apparently to fears that Marcos or somebody might try to enter the country there.
6 minutes past the hour. One of Iran's most powerful leaders today praised President Reagan for trying to improve relations with his country. Parliamentary Speaker Hashemi Rafsanjani also showed reporters what he says is the Bible Mr. Reagan sent along on that secret trip to Tehran by his aides. Rafsanjani opened the Bible to its title page. It's signed Ronald Reagan and bears a handwritten verse from the New Testament. The passage from Galatians preaches the common heritage of all peoples. It says the scripture preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham and said, quote, all the nations shall be blessed in you. Rafsanjani claims Mr. Reagan's opening to Iran was undercut by political rivals who took advantage of his age and poor health. The Iranian says Mr. Reagan has acted weakly and has been defeated.
The brother of Lebanese hijack suspect Mohammed Ali Hamadi has reportedly led West German police to a supply of explosives. Ali Abbas Hamadi has now joined his brother under arrest in a Frankfurt prison. Mohammed Hamadi was arrested 2 weeks ago at Frankfurt Airport. Police sources say he was carrying the same kind of liquid explosives shown to police by his brother. Mohammed Hamadi is accused of hijacking a TWA airliner to Beirut in 1985. Police sources say his brother is suspected of arranging the kidnap of at least one of 2 West Germans missing in Beirut to avenge Mohammed Hamadi's capture. West Germany may also have arrested 4 other Arabs in connection with the Beirut kidnappings. West Germany's main news agency says police raided a home in the southwest part of the country on Monday. The home, they say, belongs to a former roommate of Ali Abbas Hamadi. Reports say he was arrested and a companion shot and seriously injured in the raid. 2 others were also reportedly taken away. West Germany has not confirmed the arrests, and it maintains a news blackout on its effort to get its hostages freed in Beirut.
The United States is showing its flag and its muscle in the Persian Gulf today. 5 warships have steamed north into the Gulf, closer than ever to the Gulf War itself. A Pentagon official says it's a show of support for America's friends in the region threatened by the fighting. And it's said to be a sign of reassurance for the Islamic Conference, now meeting not far from the fighting in Kuwait. The United States wants to get Americans out of Lebanon and keep still others from arriving. Within the next few days, the U.S. is expected to make passports invalid for travel to Lebanon, where 8 Americans are now hostages. The White House has said it can no longer assure the safety of Americans in what it calls the anarchy of Beirut. Meantime, there's no further word on the fate of British hostage negotiator Terry Waite. There are fears that he, too, has become a hostage of the people he was dealing with. Waite has not been seen in more than a week. British diplomats in Lebanon are making intensive efforts to learn his whereabouts. Reports from Managua say American spy suspect Sam Hall has left Nicaragua and is being flown back to the United States. Nicaragua announced yesterday it was releasing Hall without trial because he is mentally unstable. Officials say they feared the self-styled soldier of fortune would attempt to take his life while in custody. Hall was arrested December 12th in a restricted area of a Nicaraguan air base, carrying sketches of military targets in his socks. Nicaragua says Hall admitted bringing explosives into the country for the U.S.-backed Contra rebels. A lawyer for Eugene Hassenfuss says the American mercenary will meet in private tomorrow with the House Select Committee investigating the Iran arms Contra aid scandal. After tomorrow's scheduled hearing, the committee will decide if he should be called back for an open hearing. Hassenfuss was shot down last October in a plane ferrying guns to Contra rebels. He was pardoned by Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega after a people's tribunal had sentenced him to 30 years in prison.
Exactly 1 year ago today, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff. All 7 astronauts aboard were killed, including the first ordinary citizen in space, teacher Krista McCoy. Memorial services are planned around the country today, many organized by school children. In Charleston, West Virginia, a statue depicting McAuliffe is to be dedicated. It is made of more than 1 million pennies donated by youngsters. At the Kennedy Space Center, 73 seconds of silence will be observed beginning at 11:38 a.m. Eastern Time, the moment the Challenger mission began a year ago. CNN will have live coverage of that memorial observance. We will also carry live President Reagan's address to NASA employees via satellite. That begins at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
The families of the Challenger astronauts marked this anniversary by releasing an open letter to the American public. The letter outlines a new plan to continue the crew's mission and calls on Americans to continue to take risks and face challenges. The families say they want to extend the astronauts' work by building space learning centers across the country. They hope to raise $50 million for these so-called Challenger centers. The Challenger Center program can be reached by writing this address.
It was a big push to the moon, and everybody understood when we landed on the moon. And then the shuttle started up, and people kind of got interested again, but then it became so routine, and everyone just kind of put it in the back of their mind. One of my friends said to me,
perch in that window, grab me a camera, put my music on, and just watch the world go by. That's my plan.
Daywatch is brought to you by the City of San Antonio. We're the home of a whole lot more than the Alamo.
In San Antonio.
As we start trading on this Wednesday. I'll be back in 1 hour with more of what's happening on Wall Street from the CNN Business News Desk in New York.
These are the headlines on Day Watch. West Germany's cabinet met today on the hostage crisis as police were disposing of a cache of explosives believed connected to terrorists associated with those two holding at least 2 German hostages in Lebanon. The explosives were found in the western state of Saarland last night. Police are using robots to remove an explosive liquid, methyl nitrate, said to be the same thing found on Mohammed Hamadi when he was arrested January 13th in Frankfurt. In the Philippines, the government's troops have resorted to a bizarre tactic in efforts to get the mutinous troops to leave the broadcast facility in Manila without bloodshed. After an appeal to leave the building, the government began playing Paul Anka recordings on a loudspeaker aimed at the rebels. So far, neither the medley of songs by the American entertainer nor personal appeals or threats by the armed forces have persuaded the dissenters to flee that building. It was a year ago this morning that the shuttle sat on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center. The Challenger would roar into space at 11:38 that morning, but then 8.9 miles, 73 seconds later, the flight and the imagery became ingrained in the American consciousness. The Challenger was lost, and all 7 on board were lost with it. That moment will be recalled nationwide today. CNN will carry this memorial ceremony live from the Kennedy Space Center just a little more than 2 hours from now.
President Reagan admits to regrets about how the Iran arms deal and its ancillary actions turned out, but in his State of the Union message, he offered no apology for his effort to get captive Americans freed in Beirut. Almost in a tone of defense of his critics, against his critics, the president said Americans must not be so fearful of failure that they refuse to take risks.
And let there be no mistake about American policy. We will not sit idly by if our interests or our friends in the Middle East are threatened, nor will we yield to terrorist blackmail. And now, ladies and gentlemen of the Congress, why don't we get to work?
And with that, the president shifted the focus to the future with proposals for other topics, including ranging from the economy to social welfare. Among the Americans watching the president's State of the Union address last night, along with the rest of us, were the three journalists who are joining us this morning on Day Watch. They are Dick Williams, who is a columnist for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution; Clarence Page in our Chicago bureau. He is an editorial writer for the Chicago Tribune; and in our Washington bureau, Carl Leubsdorf, Washington bureau chief of the Dallas Morning News. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for being with us. Let me turn to you first, Dick, since you are at hand. Did the president, as Bob Dole said he had a chance to do last night, regain control of the presidency?
Well, I don't think he regained... First of all, I don't think he's ever lost control of the presidency. He's weakened, of course. I think...
Do you think he's perceived as having lost control?
Well, yes, I think there might be some who think that, but he's still the president. He still won 49 states. He's crippled. There are investigations that are going to go on ad infinitum into the next year. I think what he did, the biggest thing he did, Bob, was prove that he's healthy, and that at 76 years old, he can still give a speech, read from a prompter, and suggest a course of action for the nation. I think the substance of the speech, in terms of an agenda, did not serve to strengthen him a great deal. If you listen to the critics afterwards, the Democrats in Congress, there was nothing there that caught them by surprise.
Many Republicans were not much more enthusiastic.
That's right.
Clarence Page, same question. How did you feel the president came out of last night?
Well, I thought last night's speech was important, like last year's speech was, in a different kind of way. Last year, it was important that the president give a good speech that would help the nation to console itself after the Challenger disaster. This year, he had to give a good speech so the nation could console itself that President Reagan is still in charge and still in command. He did give a very good speech, but as the lead of our sidebar story said this morning, it was the same old song and dance. He knows how to sing and dance very well and give a very good performance, but the big questions that people, I think, out here in the Midwest had going into the speech still remained unanswered. And so it looked like the president is in good health after his operation, but there's still a question about him evading those real hard questions that people want to hear answered about Contragate. And in regard to his program, he's got 2 years left, and there's a big question over just how much of what he outlined last night he can really get done in the next couple of years. Whether or not he's a lame duck president, that question is still open.
Do you feel he's in trouble?
I feel he's definitely in trouble in terms of getting any new programs off the ground. I was interested, for example, in how he mentioned a very interesting welfare reform idea. You'll recall 6 years ago he came into the presidency talking about welfare queens and reforming welfare. 6 years later, he's talking about doing it in the next couple of years, a time in which I think Republicans are going to be realigning themselves for 88, and so are Democrats. I'm doubtful anything's really going to get done in that area, and I feel pretty much the same way about some of those other new ideas. Perhaps the catastrophic health insurance plan might get off the ground, because I think there's a lot of public sentiment in favor of that.
Carl Leubsdorf, how do you feel the president's speech will play in Dallas?
Well, I think there are two main problems with the president's speech. One is that the real concern in Texas and elsewhere has been not whether it was wise to have to get the hostages out, but whether it was wise to sell arms to the Iranians. And of course, the president in his defense last night never mentioned that aspect of it. His main regret was not that he undertook the policy, but that it didn't work out. So I think there's probably a problem in satisfying people there. The second is that a number of his aides said before the speech that it was very important for the president to lay out 3 or 4 key areas where he would have an agenda to seize the public interest. Dick Loughlin, the president's pollster, mentioned that last week, and other people. And I think it's really questionable that he did that, even in areas such as catastrophic health, which Clarence mentioned. He said he's going to have a program, and I think when we see the program, we're going to find that it's going to be mainly an encouragement to private insurance companies to increase their coverage, rather than a bolder program such as the one proposed by Secretary of HHS, Doc Bowen.
Do you all agree that Mr. Reagan should have dealt much more openly and in more detail with the Iran arms affair? Anyone?
Well, I think we all would like that, Bob, but
do you feel he should have?
I'm not sure that he can. With the number of investigations ongoing, I mean, the grand jury is being impaneled tomorrow. There are 2 congressional committee is about to look into this affair. I'm not sure what he could say. He did use the first-person pronoun. He said "I" last night, which was a change from past remarks. I'm just not sure how much he can say without risk of deepening the morass or entangling a lot of people in a lot of problems for now.
Yeah, I think it's also one of the problems is that not only is the original sale of arms very unpopular, but it's in one way it's a little late in the day for the president to show vigorous action in getting to the bottom of it. The White House feels he's done all that he could, but the fact remains, as many critics have pointed out, that the president moved very slowly in questioning top aides and trying to find out what was going on inside the White House. And to this day, he's sort of given the impression of being somewhat passive to this controversy swirling around him, as if he thinks it's not really as big a deal as many other Americans think it is. So it was a little hard to reverse that 2 months after it all started.
I think the president is in a bit of a box like that. No matter what he says, he's going to get in trouble with somebody on the contra issue. But I'm finding out here in the Midwest, in Reagan country, if you will, a lot of people, like in downstate Illinois, Reagan's home area, are really very disappointed in what Senator Byrd referred to last night as the hypocrisy, so to speak, of having one stated policy and then practicing something else. There was not a reassurance last night. Instead, he talked about taking risks. And look, we took a risk. Mistakes were made. That was kind of a new admission on his part. And I'm not sure that it was really strong enough, though, to really begin to console people as to why the mistakes were made.
Clarence, you notice something that when he made the standard statement that we won't bow to the demands of terrorists, something the president said repeatedly since he first entered office, there was not much applause in that House chamber. It doesn't play the way it did before he started the dealings with Iran.
I don't think anybody believes it anymore.
Dick Williams, hypocrisy.
Well, clearly there's a question of hypocrisy that everybody's got to worry about. I mean, you can't continue administration-wide to make statements that you're not going to deal with terrorists while clear evidence every day exists that the administration was, in fact, dealing with a nation that sponsors terrorism. But that is a problem the Reagan presidency is going to have throughout these investigations. I think of greater concern to me was, could he turn the conflict between his administration and Congress to some sort of impetus on his side? And as Clarence mentioned, and Carl, there really weren't that many new ideas. In fact, by jumping on things like competitiveness and some of the other buzzwords of the Democrats today, he seemed to be following as much as leading.
All right. Today now, the day after, a spokesman for the National Conference of Mayors refers to Mr. Reagan's mind-boggling failure to mention affordable housing as a need of this country's urban areas. I would imagine, Clarence, you are familiar with that problem.
We're very familiar. Chicago has the nation's largest public housing projects, and we are desperately in need of money here to relocate people out of these high-rise ghettos, if you will, to try to put them in low-rise, scattered-site housing. We're in desperate need of money to rehab old housing. But President Reagan's new budget contains, for the first time in a half-century, no new housing money. The only money there is for the maintaining of old housing. I noticed the camera flashed onto his housing secretary, Sam Pierce, last night, who didn't seem to be applauding enthusiastically over that. And also, you know, the Wall Street Journal yesterday mentioned, Mr. President, say something about racism. There's a renewed concern in the country about racism these days. And he didn't go into that at all either. So I'm sure a lot of urban people are going to be very disappointed in both those areas.
Bob, another interesting area that he didn't mention was the energy problem, which is especially a serious concern in Texas and throughout the Southwest. We talked last night to a couple of Texas Republican congressmen, Joe Barton and Tom DeLay, and they said they had tried through the White House and through Treasury Secretary Baker to get the president to say something about this problem and about the problem of oil prices, and there was nothing in the speech, and they were quite disappointed, and I suspect that disappointment will be shared elsewhere in the region.
Did anyone notice that on this morning after the State of the Union address, the New York Times led not with the State of the Union, but with Gorbachev's proposal for political realigning?
I sure noticed that, Bob. You're absolutely right. In fact, that stunned me, but on reflection, maybe that was the wise thing to do, because I think, as all of us have said, there really was not a lot new in the speech. There was the obligatory reference to Iran. There were continued ideas along the lines of new federalism. The welfare reform proposal really is just allowing the states to experiment, which a lot of people applaud. I think, Carl, the problem you mentioned is that the president is caught really between the poles of his support. There were hardcore conservatives who wanted him to take a very combative stance to, for example, announce some sort of deployment of SDI, to be more confrontational. The speech seemed very moderate for Ronald Reagan, which in turn, I think, allows us to second-guess him this morning and say that there were really no new initiatives.
I think that was probably a wise strategy in view of the fact that the Democrats control both houses of Congress, but I think the problem is how much this does for the president sort of in restoring the public support that he's lost, because he went way down in the polls when the Contragate scandal first broke. He's come up a little bit. I was interested in a comment made before the speech by another one of the Republican pollsters, Bob Teeter, who's done some work for the White House and works for Vice President Bush, too. He said if it was a no-news speech, he thought the president would be in trouble in terms of restoring his standing. I think we seem to agree here that it was pretty much of a no-news speech.
I would agree with the no-news speech. As the question is, will it improve his standing or not, or what caused him to lose ground? I don't think it's going to improve his standing, Annie. Whether it causes him to lose ground, time will tell.
I think anyone listening to the three of you talk this morning would come away feeling that you at least feel the speech was as much a bust as anything. Comments on that?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, because I was anxious, like I think so many other Americans were, to see how the president looked and sounded. And when he got into that vintage Ronald Reagan stuff at the end about we the people, no politician in my memory, well, I guess since John Kennedy, can move an audience the way the president seemed to be doing at that point. I think it was on the issues of substance where it fell flat, on the issues of symbolism, optimism, and to the degree that he leads by those techniques. I thought he was very effective, and I was reassured.
It sounded good.
Bob, I think we have to remember two things. One is that he is president and will be for 2 more years with all that entails. He's a powerful figure both in the nation and on the world stage. On the other hand, he's in the 7th year of an 8-year term. His popularity is down. He's not exactly a lame duck, but the Reagan era is beginning to fade. He doesn't have too many new ideas. Politicians are looking beyond, and they're not scared of Reagan anymore. The Democrats used to have trouble getting people to come and give their Saturday radio speeches because no one wanted to go on the air opposed to Reagan. Now they're openly scornful in the House chamber when he talks about how outrageous budget deficits are. And so there's a whole change in mood. The Congress and the political community are looking on.
I have to interrupt you, Carl. I'm sorry, we're out of time. Clarence Page, one final word from you.
It was a very partisan speech that gave forth a very partisan reaction. Some people might be disappointed, but I doubt that any minds were changed.
Thank you, gentlemen, all three, for having joined us this morning on Day Watch. Our guests have been Dick Williams of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Carl Leubsdorf of the Dallas Morning News, and Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune. Day Watch continues in a moment.
So many Europeans won't be making up their minds about that speech until they see how it's gone down in the USA. Richard Blystone, CNN, London.
A bus carrying Hindu pilgrims going to a religious shrine in India careened off a bridge and plunged into a river. Official reports say 50 people are dead. Unofficial observers, perhaps witnesses at the scene, say as many as 60 may have died.
Nicaragua released Sam Hall today. He is the American mercenary the Sandinistas accused of spying at an airbase near Managua. The government planned to put him on trial, but they decided to let him go because they say he is mentally unstable. Hall's brother, Democratic Representative Tony Hall of Ohio, says he's surprised it all happened so quickly.
I was excited and very grateful that he was released, and my hope was always that he would be released quickly. But I was surprised that events have moved so rapidly that he would be released in this short of time, and I'm very grateful that he doesn't have to go through a trial.
Sam Hall is expected to arrive in Miami in about an hour and a half from now. In the meantime, Eugene Hassenfuss, another American mercenary once held by the Sandinista government, has been subpoenaed to appear before the House Select Committee investigating the Iran arms contra affair. His lawyer says that Hassenfuss will give a deposition tomorrow, and he could be called back to testify before an open hearing. Hassenfuss's plane was shot down in Nicaragua while running guns to the Contras. He was convicted by a People's Tribunal and sentenced to 30 years in prison. A month later, he was pardoned.
In Tehran today, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Hashemi Rafsanjani, showed reporters a Bible he says President Reagan signed and sent to Iran. Rafsanjani says the Bible was delivered by former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane on a trip to deliver arms to Iran. He also showed photocopies of an Irish passport bearing the name Sean Devlin with McFarlane's picture on it. As the Islamic summit continues in Kuwait today, there are reports the presidents of Egypt and Syria met for the first time since 1981. That's the year Hosni Mubarak succeeded the assassinated Anwar Sadat as Egypt's president. Syria denies those reports, but witnesses say the two spent about 20 minutes together. It was seen as another step towards readmitting Egypt to the Arab fold after years on the outside. Syria and 16 other Arab nations cut ties with Egypt after Sadat signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1979.
A government order is expected to be issued soon that will bar Americans traveling to Lebanon, according to...
Now back to Day Watch on CNN.
The flamboyant pianist Liberace is gravely ill at his home in California. Spokesmen deny reports that he is dying of AIDS. They say he is suffering from anemia brought on by a watermelon diet. CNN's Sandy Kenyon has this report.
Liberace's representatives still deny a published report he suffers from AIDS. A statement released today claims he is gravely ill with pernicious anemia complicated by advanced emphysema and heart disease. Then goes on to say Liberace's doctors are vigorously treating him for his condition and are hopeful he will respond. This comes after the Las Vegas Sun reported Saturday the entertainer will die within 2 months to a year due to AIDS. The paper attributed the story to unidentified sources, but Liberace's manager insisted the Sun was wrong and demanded a retraction. Just before the holiday season, the pianist announced he would take an extended vacation from show business after completing a long run at New York's Radio City Music Hall. At the time, he spoke to CNN's Lauren Sidney about his exhaustion after more than 40 years on the road.
It's amazing, though, how many people expect me to get up in the morning and sparkle. You know what I mean?
Isn't that difficult?
You should see me in the morning sometimes. Go back to bed, you know.
Liberace's spokesman claims the showman became anemic after a lengthy diet consisting of watermelons. But the Las Vegas Sun is standing by its story that he has AIDS. Sandy Kenyon, CNN, Hollywood.
A 56-year-old Florida man is in critical but stable condition after becoming the latest recipient of an artificial heart. Raleigh Murray was implanted with a Jarvik 7 heart yesterday in a 6.5-hour operation. The artificial heart is intended as a stopgap measure until a suitable human donor can be found. Yesterday's surgery began as a heart bypass operation, but doctors were prepared beforehand to implant an artificial heart if necessary. A teenager who won more than $4 million in the Washington State Lottery last year has
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch for Wednesday, January 28th, with Reid Collins in Washington, Bob Cain and Marianne Loughlin in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. The Philippine security forces have been trying a variety of tactics to dislodge disloyal troops from a Manila broadcast facility they've been holding. CNN's Brian Jenkins is live on the line now in Manila and has the latest. Brian?
Reid, it is just past midnight in Manila. The siege has been going on for 45 hours now, and it appears the government troops have had enough. They have announced that within a few minutes they will begin lobbing tear gas canisters from tanks outside the broadcast center being held by the rebel troops. They will continue firing those tear gas canisters directly into the television station building until the rebel troops either put down their weapons and come out or return gunfire, at which point we suppose the government troops will also fire on the building. Up until now, the government has apparently wanted to avoid bloodshed, but they feel that the time has come that this attempt be squashed. A few other developments at this time. A group of military officers is reportedly meeting with Armed Forces Chief of Staff Fidel Ramos, who last year led the military revolt that forced out Ferdinand Marcos. Among the officers meeting with Ramos is Colonel Gregorio Honasan, known as Gringo, the right-hand man to Juan Ponce Enrile, the man who began the revolt last year against Marcos. Gringo was one of the key officers in that military revolt. He is meeting with Ramos and allegedly asking, or reportedly asking, I should say, that the armed forces, the government troops, not storm the broadcast center being held by the rebellious soldiers, not take action against those soldiers at this point. Of course, the implication of that is that there may be more rebellious soldiers in various spots, either around Manila or elsewhere in the country, who are ready to start some sort of trouble should the government attempt to take military action against the forces inside the TV station. There are also reports that key politicians aligned with Ferdinand Marcos left their homes Monday evening or Tuesday morning about the time that all of these incidents began, the seizure of the TV station and the attacks on military installations around Manila. Among those politicians are Arturo Tolentino, Marcos' running mate in last year's election, who has continued to be an advocate of Marcos' return to the Philippines, and who last year led a coup attempt in which soldiers, many of whom are involved in this latest coup attempt, took over the Manila Hotel and tried to reinstate the Marcos regime. Also reports that Cebu International Airport on the island of Cebu, south of Manila, has been put on alert. There are some who speculate that the recent events, the events in the past few days, were staged merely to divert attention from an attempt by Marcos to return to a point somewhere else in the country, possibly Cebu. President Aquino is scheduled to visit Cebu Friday during a campaign swing for the election next week on a new constitution for the Philippines. That election scheduled for Monday. So the intrigue regarding the possible attempt by Ferdinand Marcos to make a comeback in the Philippines continues as government troops try to clear out the rebel forces inside the television station in Manila. Reid?
Thank you. That's Brian Jenkins live on the line from Manila. Last night, President Reagan was live on the line, breaking weeks of silence on the Iran-Contra affair, telling Congress and the American people the secret initiatives did not work and the responsibility is his. Those expecting the State of the Union message to include some presidential apologies may have been disappointed. The president defended the goal of freeing American hostages, but conceded that goal was not fully met.
We did not achieve what we wished, and serious mistakes were made in trying to do so. We will get to the bottom of this, and I will take whatever action is called for.
The president asked the Congress to lay the Iran-Contra controversy to rest. He warned that partisan bickering can weaken American policy at a time when the nation must present a united front.
We will not sit idly by if our interests or our friends in the Middle East are threatened, nor will we yield to terrorist blackmail.
Democrats were quick to offer some partisan criticism, the Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd saying the president had failed in that speech to put the Iran-Contra imbroglio behind him.
The sale of arms to Iran in direct contradiction to our stated foreign policy raises real questions about trust. But it also raises real doubts about competence. Without competence and a good measure of common sense, government will have a tough time earning the nation's trust. And government without trust is government without power. That's why so many find the Iranian affair so troubling. It was a breach of faith, both here and abroad.
The White House had hoped the State of the Union message would allay doubts about the president's effectiveness as a leader. CNN's Francis Hardin's live at the White House this morning to tell us what the aides thought of Mr. Reagan's performance last night. Francis?
Reid, prior to the State of the Union address, White House aides had been saying how the president appeared would be as important as what he had to say. The consensus is that Mr. Reagan looked very good indeed. As for the speech, the White House says it received some 2,000 calls in the 2 hours right after the speech, and that 85% of them were positive. Reaction on Capitol Hill, however, is another matter. Democrats say the president's admission that of mistakes being made in regard to the Iran-Contra affair do not go far enough. GOP leaders, predictably, disagreed. The Democratic leadership of the Congress is also threatening confrontation over education, where Mr. Reagan's budget calls for reduction of the federal commitment. Foreign policy is another area ripe for confrontation, particularly the issue of aid to the Contras and deployment of the Strategic Defense Initiative. On another major domestic policy issue, catastrophic health insurance, Mr. Reagan did not offer a legislative program. However, he says he will send one up later to the Congress, but Congress isn't waiting. Committee hearings have already been scheduled in this area. And in the area of trade, Democratic leaders say they are glad Mr. Reagan has asked for their cooperation in this area, but they say they've been waiting for 3 years for him to take some initiative. Last night's speech was not a fighting one. Instead, Mr. Reagan appealed to the new Democratic-controlled Congress for cooperation in achieving his agenda in the last 2 years of his presidency. Francis Hardin, CNN, live at the White House.
These annual presidential speeches are watched closely by other nations, and there's foreign reaction this morning. We have several reports, beginning with CNN's Peter Arnett in Moscow.
This is Peter Arnett in Moscow. The Soviet media has yet to react to President Reagan's State of the Union address, but Moscow's morning newspapers give a clear enough indication of the eventual response to the president's remarks that while he looks forward to another meeting with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, a key element of the U.S.-Soviet agenda is more responsible Soviet conduct around the world. As far as the Soviet media is concerned, it is American misconduct that is the world's major problem. The official TASS news agency complains that American unwillingness to agree to direct talks with Soviet officials is the reason the Afghanistan war is continuing. The communist newspaper Pravda warns its readers that the United States is pushing for greater military presence in neighboring Turkey by offering increased economic assistance. And most papers continue to cite American intransigence as the obstacle to reaching a nuclear arms accord.
It was well after midnight in Israel when President Reagan delivered his State of the Union speech to Congress, too late to make the morning newspapers. What little coverage appeared in later editions concentrated on two issues only: the president's regrets over the Iran arms scandal and his determination to continue aid to the Nicaraguan Contra rebels. What aroused more interest here was U.S. newspaper reports saying Reagan told congressional investigators he did not recall authorizing Israel in 1985 to sell U.S. arms to Iran. While that may give Americans pause to consider the president's capabilities, it comes as a disappointment to Israelis who are hoping the White House will put to rest charges it was Jerusalem that led the U.S. into the arms shipments in the first place. Israeli leaders have not reacted officially to Reagan's State of the Union message and probably won't. But an Israeli radio reporter based in the United States described it as upbeat and not necessarily convincing. Mike Greenspan, CNN, Jerusalem.
Because President Reagan's address was broadcast in the early morning hours, there has not yet been much reaction by West Germany. But the president's comments regarding terrorism will undoubtedly interest the West German government. Reagan renewed his pledge that the U.S. will not yield to terrorist blackmail, and that holds particular significance for West Germany in lieu of its current hostage dilemma. Only last night, West German television reported that police may have broken up a major terrorist ring by arresting 4 people. In addition to those 4 arrests, officials say Ali Abbas Hamadi has also been arrested at the Frankfurt airport. He is the brother of accused terrorist Mohammed Hamadi, who has been imprisoned by West German authorities. And news reports say Abbas could be the leader of the terrorist group. Officials are only saying that the arrests were conducted by investigators looking into the Beirut kidnapping of 2 West Germans. Brad White, CNN, Frankfurt.
There is still no word about Terry Waite. 8 days have passed since the Anglican churchman trying to free hostages in Lebanon has been seen publicly. The Church of England says it is greatly concerned for Waite's safety, but there's no confirmation of reports that Waite is now a hostage himself. Waite was last seen leaving his Beirut hotel for a meeting with Shiite kidnappers.
We have a little more on the arrest of Ali Abbas Hamadi, the brother of Mohammed Hamadi, whose arrest was reported just moments ago by Brad White. There are reports that he's led West German police to a hidden supply of explosives. Ali Abbas Hamadi reportedly led police to a field where more than 5 gallons of explosive liquid was stashed. It is said to be the same substance found on Mohammed Hamadi when he was arrested 2 weeks ago at Frankfurt Airport. Crises in Lebanon and the Persian Gulf have prompted an American show of force in the region. Pentagon sources say the carrier John F. Kennedy and its escorts will extend their stay in the Mediterranean and will sail closer to Lebanon. And 5 U.S. warships are sailing north in the Persian Gulf, closer than they ever have to the Iran-Iraq war. That is meant to assure moderate Gulf states that feel threatened by the fighting. The ships will sail close to Kuwait, for one thing, scene of the current Islamic Summit Conference. Arab extremists have threatened to disrupt that meeting.
There is a good chance NASA will not launch the next Space Shuttle mission by its February 1988 target date. That's what NASA Administrator James Fletcher said this morning on ABC. Fletcher says the space agency will not launch the next shuttle until it is convinced it's absolutely safe to do so. The NASA chief says the Challenger disaster dealt a setback to the space program. It was much greater than he originally realized. It was 1 year ago that Challenger space shuttle exploded in midair, killing 7 Americans. Today, their families sent an open letter to the nation asking for help in building a tribute to the Challenger crew. For more information on this project, you can write Challenger Center, Post Office Box 90077, Washington, D.C. 20090. Relatives say the center will be a place where children can get hands-on experience with space technology. And in the second half hour of Day Watch, we'll have live coverage of the memorial observance at Kennedy Space Center.
We remember Dick Scobie. We remember Michael Smith, who earned enough medals as a combat pilot to cover his chest. We remember Judith Resnick, known as JR to her friends. We remember Allison Onizuka, who was a child running barefoot through the coffee fields and macadamia groves of Hawaii, dreamed of someday traveling to the moon. We remember Ronald McNair, who said that he learned perseverance in the cotton fields of South Carolina. We remember Gregory Jarvis. On that ill-fated flight, he was carrying with him a flag of his university in Buffalo, New York. We remember Krista McAuliffe, who captured the imagination of the entire nation. A teacher not just to her students, but to an entire people.
The big news in nutrition is calcium. But if you're looking for calcium in your cornflakes, we've really got news for you. There's none there.
Get 12 issues of Architectural Digest for only $29.95. Save almost 45% off the cover price. Call 1-800-257-1257.
It's 1:30. This is Wednesday's edition of Day Watch.
And as is his wont at this time of day, Bill Hartley is standing by at the financial desk in New York. Bill?
Rob and Marianne, looking at a very confusing market as well. The Dow just not being quite sure where it should go. It's been up, it's been down, it's been up, it's been down. Right now, hitting back up again, but given past patterns, it could just as easily turn around again. The Dow at this moment up 9.25 points. Strong day. 95 million shares have traded in 2 hours. That's quite a bit for a 2-hour range. And the broader market moving ahead, but not by all that much. It's been kind of churning around as well. The advancing issues outnumbering decliners by a very thin ratio, about 7-6. The American Stock Exchange holding on to a slim gain. It's up about 1/4 point on 6 million shares traded. And the over-the-counter market hardly moving at all. That index up just 0.03 point, and that on some 37 million shares traded. The 30-year bond turning around a bit. It is now up by 0.02 point. That yields 7.46%. Gold down rather sharply. It's off $4 an ounce. That puts it at $411.70. And silver's down a nickel to $5.67 an ounce. Deere & Company and the United Auto Workers have reached a tentative contract agreement. UAW has been on strike in that company for the last 5 months. A new labor pact could return more than 12,000 workers to jobs in Iowa and Illinois. Details of the tentative pact have been withheld pending union approval, possible this weekend. The top issues at the maker of farm equipment are job and income security.
And finally, those foreign Audis and Saabs may be popular with the yuppie generation, but those cars have been rated the year's worst by the Center of Auto Safety. Each year, the center rates cars on crash safety, fuel economy, and repair and insurance costs. For 1986, the top two lemons were the Audi 5000S. By the way, it's been recalled because of acceleration problems, and also the Saab 9000T. Among the year's gems, though, the Honda Civic, Chevrolet Nova, and Dodge Plymouth Colts. The center favoring American-made cars because of their safety equipment. I'll be back in 1 hour with more of what's happening on Wall Street from the CNN Business News Desk in New York.
In the headlines at this hour, as expected, Democrats and Republicans disagree whether President Reagan dealt adequately with the Iran arms scandal during his State of the Union address. The president admitted last night serious mistakes were made in the arms policy, but he made no apologies. Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd today said Mr. Reagan must go further to regain the confidence of the American people. Self-styled counter-terrorist Sam Hall is scheduled to arrive in Miami at this hour. Nicaragua released Hall after more than 6 months in custody on spy charges. The Sandinista government says Hall is mentally unstable. That was not 6 months, that should be 6 weeks. Hall, the brother of a U.S. congressman, was arrested on an air base near Managua in December. It has been exactly 1 year since the Challenger catastrophe, and coming up in just a few minutes, at 38 minutes past this hour, NASA centers around the country will observe 73 seconds of silence to honor the 7 shuttle crew members killed in the explosion. 73 seconds was the period from launch to the explosion that sent Challenger plunging into the Atlantic. CNN will carry the observance at the Kennedy Space Center live.
Now underway. And as the space community looks to the past today to remember the tragedy, CNN's John Holloman reports a look to the future shows NASA still has a lot of work to do.
America's space program, crippled by the Challenger disaster a year ago, is farther from recovery today than NASA officials believed immediately after the accident. NASA Administrator James Fletcher approved the shuttle's return to flight by February 1988, but that deadline is already slipping, perhaps to 1989.
If the things slip downstream a little ways and delay 6 months or even a year, the world isn't going to fall apart.
Fletcher says NASA is well on the way to fixing the shuttle, but larger problems loom ahead.
Restoring public confidence that we can do things if we're supported properly.
And it's the problem of support from Congress and the White House that most worries NASA critics.
Simply fixing the solid rocket motor may prevent another Challenger accident, but we're creating the environment for losing another shuttle sometime in the future.
Should we lose another one, I think that apart from the loss of life, as tragic as that would be, the strategic damage to this country in terms of our ability to function effectively in space is almost beyond description and calculation.
While the U.S. space program was virtually grounded, the Soviets continued to launch their strategic satellites.
Going 2 whole years without a launch from the shuttle, especially, is giving us a little bit of heartburn at this time.
To survive, the space program needs goals.
What are the aspirations of the United States? Do we want to really make the hard investments that are required to maintain our scientific and technological preeminence?
For James Fletcher, the goals are an orbiting space station by the 1990s and colonization of Mars in the next century. But he admits he can't get there without support.
And I think to do that, we really have to start flying again and showing that we really can do things right.
John Holloman, CNN, Washington.
We will be switching live to the Kennedy Space Center momentarily, and we'll bring you the memorial ceremony that commemorates the first anniversary of the Challenger disaster. At 11:38 Eastern Time, it lifted off from pad 39B. 73 seconds later, that last mission of the Challenger had ended in the tragic explosion. As we know, all 7 crew members were killed, and the live coverage of that event became a powerful and sad memory in America's consciousness. A number of family members of the Challenger crew presented Vice President George Bush an artist's rendition of one of the planned Challenger space centers. This happened this morning in the old executive offices building next to the White House. The family members also left some Challenger patches to be given to the White House staff. Before then, they left for their own private memorials for their dead relatives, their fathers, and their husbands. And following the Florida ceremonies, we will have here in the studio 2 experts on the space program who are Wayne Biddle of Discover Magazine and Professor Robert Jastrow. They'll be joining us in the studio, and they'll be discussing some of the pros and cons of where we have been and where we are going with the space program itself, and more likely with respect directly to the Space Shuttle program. Have the ills of the program been cured, and are we going on further into the stars, and when? When is one of the questions which Dr. Fletcher and others have been addressing lately. When will the shuttle be able to fly once again? Can it meet the target date early next year or not? Let's go now very briefly and shortly to the Kennedy Space Center. It was a cool morning. It was 33 degrees a moment ago at the Kennedy Space Center, but with sunrise and warming, it gradually got up to the current 57 degrees. A much warmer and brighter day it was this morning at sunrise than it was there a year ago. We're going to see some familiar scenes that everybody who's been connected with the space program has seen before. There's going to be some difference here. There is no launch plan today, simply the memory of something that happened 1 year ago.
Associated with the storm, snowing only at the higher elevations, but there are winter storm warnings in effect in much of the area. We'll have weather details coming up a little bit later. Now stay tuned for the International Hour.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Good afternoon and welcome to the International Hour. I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Ralph Wingy and Donna Kelley will be joining me shortly from our Atlanta headquarters, but first we will hear from President Reagan, who will commemorate this first anniversary of the Challenger shuttle disaster with NASA employees by satellite. We will be bringing you that satellite message, of course, from the Oval Office. Earlier today, NASA held its own memorial of silence. For 73 seconds past 11:38 a.m. Eastern Time, there was no sound at that part of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. One difference, the temperature was 57 degrees at that moment, not the frigid 33 degrees that may have been a major contributing factor to last year's tragedy. Those 73 seconds, the length of that Challenger flight, were also observed silently around the nation, in schoolrooms, in businesses, and in government. And as we say, President Reagan now prepared from the Oval Office to address the NASA workers and the nation. Let's go to the Oval Office and the President.
Today is a day to commemorate and a day to salute. We commemorate the magnificent Challenger 7, whom we lost last year at this time, and we salute you, the men and women of America's NASA team. America will never forget that terrible moment a year ago when our elation turned to horror and then to grief and pain. 7 of our finest perished as they reached for the boundaries of space, where Earth ends and the path to the stars begins. No, we will never forget them. They represented so much of the best that is in our land. They were Dick Scobie and Michael Smith, both heroes of battle, both experienced test pilots, both with the heart and soul the great explorers have always had, always searching, always reaching. There were Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, and Gregory Jarvis. They were pioneers of the mind as well as the stars. From every corner of America they had come, and from many backgrounds, to join hands in a common adventure. Don't they, by their example, tell us just why it is our blessed land has become so great? And of course, there was Christa McAuliffe, whose profession was among humanity's most honored and revered, that of a teacher. She had hoped on that mission to give history's first lessons from space, lessons that were to be beamed to school children across America and around the world. Well, she never got to give those lessons in space science, but she and the others did teach America's children something nevertheless, something precious, something enduring, something perhaps more valuable than any other lesson they will ever learn. I remember in the hours and days following the tragedy, there was talk of the permanent trauma the children of America might suffer as a result of viewing the shuttle disaster. And yes, the events that day did leave their impression on them, but not the one that we feared. No, instead, one that can make us all proud of the strength and spirit, the courage and love of our young people. You can see that lesson reflected in one simple fact. The number of new memberships in our Young Astronauts program has never been higher. This past year, I spoke to a meeting of the young astronauts, and I can tell you that another place that lesson is reflected is in those young astronauts' eyes. They know that exploration has its risks. They know that with adventure also goes danger. They know all this, but they also know something far more important, something about the spirit and sense of joy that have kept man reaching through the ages to grasp for the limits of his universe and beyond that. Despite hardships and peril, kept explorers like Columbus, Magellan, and Drake sailing into uncharted oceans that, despite comforts they left behind, kept pioneers like Boone, Carson, and Clark crossing America's frontier, that keep us still reaching for the unknown. Christa McAuliffe and all the magnificent Challenger 7 taught this lesson of courage, spirit, and love to America's children. And now it's for all of us to learn the lesson from them. This has been a year of careful self-examination at NASA. Under the able leadership of Jim Fletcher, you've moved quickly to implement the recommendations of the Phillips Task Force and the Rogers Commission, and have just completed a broad and important reorganization. Everyone in the NASA team has again shown their dedication, their commitment to excellence, and now NASA has begun to resume its forward progress. This year we mark the third decade of space exploration. In those 3 decades, with NASA in the lead, mankind has received images from the outer reaches of our planetary system, sampled the climate of Mars, learned new and undreamed of truths about our own planet, and landed a man on the moon. In the next 3 decades, NASA will again lead in mankind's dreams. In just 2 years, Voyager 2 will pass Neptune and unlock for us the secrets of that distant brother to our own Earth. By the end of the next decade, the Galileo orbiter and probe will tell us more than ever before about Jupiter, and the Hubble Space Telescope will be in orbit, looking into deep space, helping us understand the creation of solar systems like our own. And in an international project, the Ulysses probe will teach us more about the sun. These unmanned projects are the scouts for manned space travel of decades to come. In the next decade, we in America will continue man's personal adventure into space. He will soon be starting development of a space station to have it ready by the mid-90s. The space station will be our gateway to the universe, our foothold in outer space, the keystone of our space program. With it as our base camp, we will be able to reach the planets and perhaps one day to the stars. We hope our friends and allies will join us in this great adventure. But that's not all you'll be doing in the decade and more to come. Here at home, you'll be shrinking the Earth as humanity never before dreamed. You will be developing a space plane so that one day ordinary travelers can take off on the east coast of the United States and land in Japan a little over 2 hours later. And one other thing. In the next decade, we will build and fly a new space shuttle. For me, this is a special commitment. In the first moments of grief and shock, the bereaved families of the crew urged us to carry on and keep the space program moving forward. We owe it to them and to those whom we, too, lost to do just that. Now, I know that voices have been raised from time to time saying, oh yes, it's exciting and adventurous, but does it have any practical value to justify its costs? Well, the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Perhaps we've been derelict in not doing more to make known the literally thousands of human-oriented technological developments that have spun off from the program and which will affect all our lives and the lives of our children and our children's children. There's every reason to believe these spin-offs will become of tremendous value. Already they include life-saving technologies like the programmable heart pacemaker, the CAT scanner, and life-saving fireproof vest for firemen. Space spin-offs have made drinking water safer for communities in developing countries. Technology from the lunar rover now makes it possible for paraplegics to drive automobiles and drive them safely. Our automobile engineers in Detroit are using lightweight, super-strong plastic-like materials, outgrowths of space program technology, to reduce the weight of cars. For consumers, that means more miles per gallon. And in the future, the space program will be making materials in space where we can manufacture in 1 month's time life-saving medicines that would take 30 years to produce here on Earth. I understand that a project is now being developed to pass on to all Americans specific knowledge of this aspect of the space program. The United States Space Foundation, a non-profit educational foundation, is preparing a series of TV and radio public service statements so that all Americans will be aware of these achievements and how they will benefit all of our lives. I think this is a worthy effort. Yes, whether it's in the exploration of space or the applications of space research here at home, the future to which you are leading us is bright. The challenge that you're shouldering for all mankind is one that we cannot turn away from. We owe it to our children and their children and generations beyond. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to those who, with all their love and joy and courage, taught us again just 1 year ago today that mankind's reach must exceed its grasp, or what's a heaven for. Thank you all. God bless you.
1 year ago today, in memory of the Challenger 7, President Reagan addressing NASA employees nationwide live from the Oval Office. Donna?
Across the country, Americans are remembering the 7 who perished on board the shuttle. A NASA official presented the state of New Hampshire with a portrait of Krista McAuliffe. McAuliffe was to